morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Enterprise AI Show. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and today we're going to follow up on last week's new structure or new kind of framework that we did, the models and markets or models and money. We're not totally sure what we're going to use for the name there, but something along those lines, where Aaron and I sit down, grab one topic, talk about it for about 15 minutes. We got really good feedback from people last week, over the weekend for that show, and we thought we would at least try one more. We may do a few more as we move along, but today we're going to dig into kind of looking at how enterprise organizations are going to start trying to figure out how to do the equivalent of FinOps, but around AI. So sort of AI FinOps, if you will. And so we're going to dig into that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Nasuni. There's a growing gap in AI right now between what's possible in theory and what successfully works at scale inside an enterprise. The difference comes down to unstructured file data. Many AI initiatives struggle because the file data they depend on is scattered, unstructured, and disconnected from where and how work actually happens. Nasuni changes that. It brings your unstructured file data into a single, secure foundation so AI, both generative and agentic, can access it with the context, governance, and performance it needs in production. Bring AI to where your unstructured data lives. See what it takes to activate your data for AI and request a demo at nasuni.com/AI. Today's show is sponsored by ShareGate. You're out of time. Copilot needs to be deployed ASAP, but your tenant really isn't ready for it. Years of data, permissions, and users lurk in its shadows, ready to be exposed by AI. ShareGate Protect sees it all, so you can find the exposure risks, fix them fast, and deploy AI with confidence. Microsoft 365 governance, they've got this. Learn more at sharegate.com/protect. Good feedback from folks on these dithering style shows, these short, get to the point, let's talk about a topic. We're going to do it again. So what topic, what hot thing do you have on your mind that you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so we have a good mutual friend in the industry, and actually was speaking to them earlier today. And I was like, oh man, we got to talk about this. So I don't know that anybody's really talked about this yet, but again, going back to like, hey, we want to compare it against a trend that happened in the past. So in public cloud, you had this rise of public cloud, and you had all of this usage and consumption, and then eventually prices went up and prices went up. And then you had this entire cottage industry or category of the market that popped up was FinOps. I mean, FinOps was like the thing for a while there in the industry, yep. Right? And there were some major players in that space. And, I think they've all since exited and we've kind of moved on, but everything old is new again. And I'm wondering, hey, is there a role in the near future based off of kind of what we said in the last show is there going to be FinOps for AI?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I'll go back to that same event that I keynoted a couple of weeks ago. That was 2 or 3 of the questions came up in the audience of people saying, hey, you guys talked about, understanding costs and managing costs. Like, am I going to be able to reuse that stuff? Or, is this going to be completely different? No, I think it's a great topic. It was interesting. I was listening to, and I don't know how old it was a recent Ben Thompson strategy interview with Satya Nadella. So I think he's, it's been the last probably
couple months,
a few weeks since you're listening to this. Yeah,
you're right.
And it was later in the interview, but they were getting into pricing. And, Ben was sort of talking about, asking Satya, he said, look, at one point you guys started with Copilot being a per seat license, kind of traditional sort of software per seat license. And it feels like now you're starting to blend this idea of like a per outcome license or, something along those lines. And Satya had a couple of interesting terms and phrases that I thought was very interesting. One of them was, he was kind of quick to point out that, yes, we're starting to hear people talk about like outcome-based, results-based pricing. And he said, the reality of that is, that's essentially like, it wasn't a tax, it was a royalty. He said it was, essentially that's me asking for a royalty on your good ideas. And he said, that's going to be a hard thing. It's going to be a hard thing to get people to buy into, but at the same time, he was like, if it's a hard thing to talk about seat-based licensing when at the same time you're also talking about like people managing 1,000 agents, and they're, do I really want to pay for 1,000 of those things? So I think that was really interesting to sort of hear the fact that the kind of king of seat-based licensing hasn't quite figured out how they're going to adapt this thing. And then the other part that I thought was really interesting, and this was, he said, we're at a point now where, and this was Ben kind of expanding upon it and saying, hey, you guys have run into some availability problems or shortage problems, like people are, I can't get enough tokens and so forth. And Satya kind of came back and he's like, yeah, we're starting to hear people talk about running their own environments. And he's like, and we're hearing them talk about things being metered intelligence and unmetered or unencumbered intelligence. And it was an interesting framing because it was like the goal isn't how many tokens you use or what it was. It was, I want to build intelligence for my company, or I want to build intelligence for what I do. But he was starting to become very aware of this idea that there's the metered part that people are only going to be able to afford so much, and they're going to start looking for ways to get sort of the unmetered or self-owned thing. So yeah, I think we're going to see the concept. It just may be talked about in different terminology and so forth.
Well, and you have a great point, and I kind of relate it to, okay, so first of all, let's go back to why did we need FinOps for cloud, right? Well, the reason why is because the consumption was almost too easy. And it could be too dispersed, right? So there's this idea of centralization of expenses. And then, by the way, that feeds into lots of other things, capital allocation, budgets, all these other things. And that's when cloud became a line item in a budget, in an enterprise budget, right? Like we've said on the show in the past, like, okay, when something really matters is when it becomes a line item on an enterprise budget, a dedicated line item, and cloud was. But at the same time, we had how do you get control around it? How do you do all these other things? And this kind of led us into, this present thing of like, I love the analysis of the per seat versus per token, what's going on there. But also too, one big thing with all of this is, yes, every time a new model comes out, it's like, oh, this is more powerful. Oh, and by the way, it costs more. And so prices just keep going up and up and up. And we aren't to a point of business outcomes. Maybe that is a future state. Maybe that's that future state we're going to end up on the show today. But today it is per token pricing. But then there's all this like, oh, I have an allocation and I use all my allocation and I got to pay more. And at what point does like an enterprise, they keep paying for seats, they keep running out of things? I'll give you a for instance, in my day job, we have a certain allocation. It is actually kind of funny. Like I work for an AI company, but we have an allocation, and all the time, like a little error pops up. Oh, you're out of allocation, and then somebody puts more coins in the coffer, kind of thing. And like, what is going to happen when like the CFO comes in and goes, you know what, this is the budget, and
well,
like,
and
you've used your allocation, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. I mean, it's a hard thing for two reasons. One, it's going to be, part of the reason FinOps came along was because, this is, Corey Quinn's entire business of like, how do I make sense of that thing, right? Like it used to be, I bought some servers, I bought some storage, I bought some network, and it was done. And now it's like, wait, inbound pricing is different than outbound pricing and cross-region pricing, and, like buying it in tiers. And so, you were talking a foreign language to them. They had no idea what that meant, and tokens aren't going to be any easier. I mean, okay, cool. You want to do a project. How many tokens is that going to take? Well, I don't know. It depends if I'm doing deep reasoning or if I'm doing this, or like impossible to explain to anybody, right? Like, okay, well, how much does an outcome cost? Well, I don't know. It's going to depend on, and then, the other piece, the other piece that's going to be really interesting to your point is, the token meter stops at 10 in the morning or 11 in the morning or whatever. Now you got to go back to being like, okay, do the rest of the work by hand, right? It'd be like, okay, stop using your laptop and go back to writing on paper, or use a typewriter or something else. Yeah, it's that sort of uncertainty in a business is going to lead some people again back to this thing of like, do I have the right kind of controls in place so that I can operate the business in a real, in an understandable, reliable way? Because the last thing you want to do. Can you imagine being, like you're a luxury hotel operator or you're selling something, and all of a sudden it's like your customer's like, okay, I'm ready to do the deal. And your system's like, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to have to wait till tomorrow for the token budget to reset. And they're like, all right, I'm leaving. I'll take my PO and hit the road and get out of here. Like,
yeah. Well, and I've often compared, a lot of the big AI models in the sky, if you will, to Ferraris, right? And right now what's going on is everyone's allowed to drive around in subsidized Ferraris. And what happens when that stops? And what happens when like you have Ferrari tastes, but like you can only afford the minivan or, the basic car, and And then, and it's like, man, I feel like there is going to be a moment in our industry that's going to come in the future of there's a lot of folks used to driving around in the Ferrari all day long, free gas, free everything. And I don't see that happening forever. And so I think there is going to be an entire FinOps for AI segment.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, look, it's like anything. It's, it's goes back to the old Dunning thing of, is it, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I mean, right now you can't measure any of this stuff. And the people who have measured it have been like, I'm not getting the ROI I kind of expected on things. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a reckoning coming. It's just a matter of, there's going to be people who are like, we did the responsible thing. We tried to be accountable. And then there's going to be the groups who said, we said, damn the torpedoes, burn the bridges. We're just going to keep cranking along because it moves our business forward. And there's going to be that yin and yang of like, okay, I've got the actual budget to keep track of and the books to balance. And oh my gosh, my peers are running faster than me. I better not do that, right? So, it's the same reason we've had so much hype right now is CEOs are like, I feel like I'm behind.
Yeah, I like to put you on the spot with these like off the top of my head questions as I'm thinking of them. So here's another one for you. Okay, let's say FinOps becomes a thing.
Yep.
And let's say like, okay, does that mean the ones that have gone through it, meaning the AWSs, the Googles, the Azures of the world, where like they built an entire model around, on the hyperscaler business. Do you think they have an advantage in this space over, say, an Anthropic or an OpenAI who, at the end of the day, their incentive is like consume, man? And like, what's your thoughts on like, how does the markets play out?
Well, I mean, I think it's, I think there's going to be some fundamental basic things. Like we've talked about this before. So, Google has a structural advantage versus like an Anthropic or the others who don't own their own chips, right? So they own their own model, they own their own chips, they own their own data center, right? And we've talked about Anthropic owns their model, but they don't own their own chips and they don't own their own data centers. So there's going to be some fundamental leverage that can come into play in terms of adapting prices. You're going to have the thing where, Google can subsidize far longer than others can because, they've got that ad money printing machine and they've got the YouTube money printing machine that the other ones don't have. So there's some structural things there going on, and then I think, they're going to keep trying to figure out ways to be like, okay, I can't keep offering a good ChatGPT service to somebody who's just like, can you tell me about my feelings? Can you tell me what to pick at the grocery? Like those are expensive queries that, they can't afford to keep doing at subsidized levels. So I think we're going to see them, start to do these things more. It's just a matter of right now, that can't be a priority in engineering for any of those companies, right? They're like, I gotta get out in front of agents. I gotta get out in front of the latest and greatest models. You've got people like, Ben Thompson, who's like, oh my gosh, I can totally tell the difference between Fable and Opus 4.6. And you're like, no, you really can't. It's a feel, but it's, so yeah, I think nobody ever cuts cost until you miss a quarter. Nobody ever cuts cost until, the line turns red from being black in the profit thing. So I think, I think initially you're going to have the companies that have structural advantage are going to be able to move a little faster once that red, if it shows up. And then you're going to, get a lot of really creative stuff coming along in terms of like, here's how I pinched here and squeezed there and reduced here. But those things don't happen until the line turns red, as opposed to, going up and to the right.
Agreed. I think that's a great place to stop.
All right, man. Well, good. Another, I guess we need to come up with a name. We keep internally calling these ditherings, so we can't do that.
But maybe by the time we publish them, maybe you and I need to work on that. But we'll ask the AIs. We'll have the AIs come up with a name, and then we'll put it in there. And by the time you actually hear this, it'll have a name. Who knows?
Yeah. So another short show. Hopefully these are useful. If you've got some topics you'd like us to go over, or things that you're thinking a lot about, hit us up. show@theenterpriseaishow.com. You can hit us up on socials as well. So thanks everybody for listening. Aaron, good to have you back. And folks, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening. Check us out at theenterpriseaishow.com for past shows, newsletters, and all things enterprise AI.